Okay, we're going to talk about the U.S. Supreme Court in Section 3.
I'm Brick Tamlin. People seem to like me because I am polite and I'm rarely late. I like to eat ice cream and I really enjoy a nice pair of slacks.
So our objectives for Section 3 are: what is the process through which cases are tried in the Supreme Court? How do justices get appointed to the Supreme Court and how long do they serve? And how has judicial review strengthened the court's power and how does Congress limit this power?
Mr. Roboto was lying to us.
Tell me something I don't know.
I open-mouth kissed a horse once.
Say what?
That's something you don't know.
Yeah, my old girlfriend from Oklahoma was going to fly out here for the dance, but she couldn't because she's doing some modeling right now.
Is he hot?
See for yourself.
Wow.
Yeah, I took her to the mall to get some glamour shots for her birthday one year.
I like her bangs.
Me too.
So, there are literally thousands of cases, court cases, that are appealed to the Supreme Court every year. Remember, the Supreme Court has appellate jurisdiction, not original jurisdiction. So courts have to be appealed there. There are thousands that get appealed each year, and yet only a handful actually ever make it to the Supreme Court.
Braxton was diagnosed with choroid plexus carcinoma, a brain tumor. Scene 2.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today, finally, we are stepping into the big leagues. That's right, I'm trying out for the Cubs. No, we're going to talk about how the Supreme Court of the United States actually works. I could try it for the Cubs, right, Stan? Sometimes people refer to it by the unfortunate nickname SCOTUS, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to call it the Supreme Coco, or Coco Supreme. Now, let's just be respectful. So strap in and get ready for some highly technical discussion of procedure as we learn how you, yes you, probably not you, can bring a case to the Supreme Court. The first thing you need to take a case to the Supreme Court is a case, or controversy, and except in certain rare situations where the court has original jurisdiction, that case has to have already been heard and decided by a lower court and appealed. And not just once. Before a case gets to the Supreme Court, you have to have exhausted your appeals at lower levels of the state or federal system. If you've lost your previous appeals but still think that you have an issue worthy of the court's attention, you can petition for a writ of certiorari, which people in the know call the cert, because they're keeping it cash, which is short for casual. For a look at how the court chooses cases, let's go to the thought bubble, or the thubub. A lot of nicknames today, Stan. Or ST. Certiorari is a formal request that the Supreme Court hear your case, but petitioning for a writ is no guarantee of anything. The federal government's chief lawyer, the Solicitor General, is basically like a bouncer at a hot club, if you're old enough to get into a hot club. They screen out a lot of petitions because those cases don't raise a lot of federal law questions or because they've already been decided in other cases. Or they're not wearing good enough shoes to get in the club. If, and it's a big if, your petition is granted, it goes into the cert pool, the first round in which the justices decide which cases they're actually going to decide. The list of cases that will be decided is called the discussion list. For the judges to actually hear the case, called granting certiorari, 4 of the 9 justices have to agree to hear it. This is called the Rule of 4. The discussion of the discussion list and decision about whether or not to grant certiorari happens at the conference, which is like the back of the club where the really well-dressed people go. So the judges have read your petition, and 4 of them have decided that your case is one of about 80 that they will hear. Congratulations! Now you and the side that disagrees with your position have to submit briefs. Briefs are not underwear. Briefs are written legal arguments from each side explaining why the law favors their position. The party bringing the case seeking to overturn the lower court decision is the petitioner. The party that wants the court to uphold or affirm the lower court's decision is called the respondent. The petitioner also files a reply, which attempts to rebut the respondent, which is not a euphemism. After filing all this, you're finally on your way out of the thought bubble. You're on your way to court. Thanks, the bub. You might think that there would only be 2 briefs in a case, one from each side, and it's true that there must be at least 2. But often there are many, many more briefs, and even boxer briefs. That's what Stan wears. Stan, put your pants on. All undergarments aside, individuals or groups who are not actually parties to the case but have an interest in the outcome can also file amicus curiae, or friend of the court briefs. Amicus briefs often contain different legal, economic, or historical arguments that can sometimes persuade justices and appear in their opinions. They're also one way that interest groups can attempt to influence the Supreme Court. After the briefs have been filed, the court schedules oral arguments, giving them time to read and consider the briefs. Each side gets half an hour to make its case, but this time includes questions from the justices, so most of the time is usually spent answering questions. Imagine a presentation with the most intense teacher you've ever had bombarding you with questions, except that there are 9 teachers. Well, 8, because Clarence Thomas never speaks. After oral arguments, you wait for a decision. The justices then meet in another conference, which is held on a Wednesday or a Friday, because there's good TV the other days. In order for the court to render an official decision, 5 of the 9 justices, a majority, must agree on at least one of the legal arguments that either affirms or overturns the lower court's decision. Although they can also send a case back down to the lower court for another decision, which is called a remand, although you might call it a punt. Ooh, that was like 30 yards. The Chief Justice presides over the conference and assigns the task of writing the court's decision, called the majority opinion. The opinions are given in writing, although sometimes justices will read them from the bench. Sometimes the court will issue a single majority opinion, which is a very strong statement of unified agreement. In the key civil rights case of Brown versus Board of Education, the court issued a single opinion that was even stronger because it was unanimous. But sometimes the court will issue multiple opinions on the same case. The decision of the court, either to affirm or overturn the lower court's ruling, is called the holding, and this is the first thing you need to know in any Supreme Court decision. The second thing that matters is the legal reasoning or rationale behind the holding. If a justice agrees with the holding in the majority opinion, but for different legal reasons, they write a concurring opinion. The rationale in this concurrence is cool and everything, but the lower courts do not need to follow it. Only the holding of the majority and its rationale are binding on lower courts. A single justice writes a concurrence, but other justices can sign on to it if they agree with its logic. For instance, the Eagle and I both agree that fish are delicious, but I would write a concurrence that the scales and the eyeballs are gross. It's unlikely this would go to the Supreme Court, though. Let's solve it now. Problem solved. Many Supreme Court cases are not unanimous. In fact, in an ideologically divided court, you are likely to find a lot of cases decided by 5-4 margins. The judges who are on the losing side, who didn't support the majority decision, can write a dissenting opinion. A dissent does not set a precedent for a lower court and has no force of law. But often dissents are very eloquent and they can provide arguments that might persuade later courts in similar decisions. Sometimes, as with the famously bad case of Plessy versus Ferguson, the arguments in a dissent can form the foundation for the majority opinion in a later case, even though it can take 50 years to get from a case like Plessy to Brown versus Board of Education. So that's the nuts and bolts of how Supreme Court decisions are made. But before we wrap this up, here are a few key things to remember. First, there are a lot of hurdles you need to jump over before a court makes a decision in a case. Most certiorari petitions, there are usually about 8,000 each year, don't make it past the clerks or the Solicitor General, and don't get granted. It takes 4 judges to agree to hear a case, but 5 to render a majority opinion. Only the holding and the rationale supported by at least 5 of the 9 justices becomes binding precedent for lower courts. Dissents and concurrences may be fun and interesting to read, especially if there are pictures, and they may include important legal ideas, but lower courts don't need to follow them. So that's how the court works procedurally, but there's another way to think about Supreme Court decision-making. To really understand the Supreme Court, we need to consider the thinking behind judicial decisions. But that's for another episode. Thanks for watching. Crash Course Government and Politics is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. Support for Crash Course U.S. Government.
Okay, so there's how the Supreme Court works. So like they said, thousands of cases are held each year. There's only about 1 to 200 that actually make it to the docket, actually get put on the docket so that the court will actually even consider them. Like they said, in order for a case to be heard, 4 of the 5 justices must agree to hear it. Court cases are going to be selected based upon the significant public interest or questions that they may create. And like I said, 4 of the 9 justices must vote to hear a case. If the justices say, nope, we're not going to hear this case for whatever reason, whatever court was the last court to render a decision, that is the court, that is the decision that stands, which means the case has been rejected.
I love scotch. I think I was in love once.
Really? What was her name? I don't remember. That's not a good start, but keep going.
She was Brazilian. Or Chinese, or something weird. I met her in the bathroom of a Kmart, and we made out for hours. Then we parted ways, never to see each other again.
I'm pretty sure that's not love.
Damn it.
So, Supreme Court justices, they are appointed by the president, but they have to be approved by a majority of the Senate. And they are appointed for life. They can be impeached, however. Otherwise, they are there for as long as they want to be. In fact, there have been more presidents of the United States than there have been chief justices of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Did you ride the bus to school?
No. I ride my bike.
What kind of bike do you have?
It's a sledgehammer.
Dang! You got shocks, pegs. Lucky. You ever take it off any sweet jumps?
Clark used to get beef laid in his face all the time.
Oh, and you didn't?
I got wedgies. That's different. It's cooler.
Okay, courts can decide if a law or presidential action is unconstitutional. Now, I'm going to break away here real quick, and we are going to look at, let me bring this back. Where's my toolbar? Me typing this up is just like if I was writing something on the board. So make sure and get this in your notes. Now, what's going to happen is there are three types of decisions. Let me change the font. Okay, three types of decisions the Supreme Court can make. The first one is just not three types of decisions, three types of opinions. Okay, so the first one is just an opinion. An opinion is states why the court decided the way they did. Then you have what's called a concurring opinion. So a concurring opinion is when you have a majority that agrees on what the decision would be, but they agree for different reasons. So let's say that you and a bunch of your friends decide that you want to go to Norfolk to eat. And you decide that, well, do you want Mexican food? Do you want Italian food? Do you want more American food like steak? Do you want fast food? Do you want to sit down? And so you decide that you want to have some Italian food. Okay, so you want Italian food. Well, do you want to go to Pizza Hut, Godfather's, Valentino's? You're going to get Little Caesars. You're going to get something from maybe Casey's. What place do you want to go? We will talk about this on part 2 of this lecture.